Welcome to our deep dive on helping kids navigate grief. You know, it's a tough topic. We're going beyond the surface here.
Absolutely.
We want to give you a really solid understanding of how to respond to children's grief, and all its complexity.
Yeah.
So think of this as your comprehensive guide.
It is fascinating how different a child's experience of grief is compared to an adult's. And we'll dive into those developmental nuances, explore practical tips, and we'll even touch on some sensitive areas,
Yeah.
like helping children understand suicide.
We have your stack of resources, ready guides, expert insights. We've even got some personal stories in there.
Great.
And the goal is to leave you feeling not just informed, but empowered.
The first thing to understand is that a child's brain develops in stages.
Okay.
So their grasp of death and grief is going to be very different from yours and even evolve as they grow.
So like a 5-year-old who asks, when's my goldfish coming back? They're not being silly.
Right.
They're genuinely trying to make sense of things.
Exactly. Preschoolers often don't get death's permanence.
Right.
They imagine the person is simply away and will return.
But then school-aged kids, they get that death is final.
Yeah.
But then they often start grappling with guilt, like wondering if they somehow caused it.
Right, because they're developing logic and reason.
Yeah.
But magical thinking that their thoughts or actions have power over the world is still very real to them.
So that if only I had been nicer kind of thinking.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So how do we help them untangle that guilt?
Well, one of the guides suggests simple, clear language, like, it's natural to feel that way, but nothing you did or said made this happen.
Okay.
Reinforce that death is a natural part of life, like plants and animals having lifespans.
That makes sense. What about teenagers, though? They seem to understand death, but their reactions can be all over the place.
Yeah, their experience is closer to an adult's,
Right.
but magnified by that intensity of adolescence.
Yeah.
They're also juggling those identity questions, social pressures, and perhaps a shifting family dynamic,
Yeah.
all while their emotional regulation skills are still developing.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
And to add to that complexity, grief doesn't always show up as tears.
Right. Absolutely. You might see behavioral changes, acting out, clinginess withdrawal,
Yeah.
even regression to younger behaviors.
Wow.
Changes in sleep, appetite, school performance, social interactions.
Oh, wow.
All of these can be signs of a child working through grief.
So how do we even create the right environment for them to express what they're going through?
Well, one of the experts emphasizes creating a safe space for open communication, free from judgment.
Okay.
Encourage them to talk without pushing for a right answer.
And honesty is key here.
Yes.
We should ditch euphemisms like passed away. I mean, those can be confusing, especially for younger kids.
Exactly. Straightforward language tailored to their age is best. One guide recommends starting conversations with open-ended questions, like, what's that been like for you? Or, what are you feeling right now?
Yeah.
It invites them to share without feeling pressured to have it all figured out.
Yeah. And it's okay if we don't have all the answers ourselves.
That's right.
Sometimes just listening with empathy is the most powerful response.
That resonates with me deeply. Our instinct is often to fix things, but with grief, it's about allowing the child to experience their feelings,
Yeah.
validate them, and let them know they're not alone.
So alongside open communication, are there specific things we can do to actively support their coping and healing?
Absolutely. Routine and structure are incredibly important,
Right.
especially in those early days and weeks.
Yeah.
The familiar can be a source of comfort and stability
Right.
when everything else feels chaotic.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see how that would make a difference. And what about creative outlets?
Yes.
Things like art, music, writing.
Yeah.
Those have always helped me process difficult emotions.
They're fantastic tools for children, too. Encourage drawing, painting, writing stories or poems, even composing music.
Yeah.
It allows them to express their feelings in a non-threatening, tangible way.
One guide even mentions creating a memory box
Oh, yeah.
filled with objects and photos, letters
Yes.
related to the loved one.
That's a beautiful way to keep the person's memory alive and to create a tangible connection to the past.
Mm.
And it can be a collaborative process
Oh, nice.
involving the child in choosing what goes inside.
But sometimes the loss is very sudden and unexpected,
Right.
like an accident or suicide. I mean, those conversations are so incredibly difficult. How do we approach those with sensitivity?
Honesty is still paramount, even if it's hard. Use age-appropriate language,
Yeah.
but be truthful about the cause of death.
When it comes to explaining suicide,
Yeah.
one of the resources emphasizes focusing on the fact that the person was struggling with a mental illness that made it really difficult for them to think clearly.
Exactly, and reiterate that it was not anyone's fault.
Yeah.
And it's also a chance to open a dialogue
Hmm.
about mental health and the importance of seeking help when we're struggling.
And speaking of seeking help,
Mhm.
let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, self-care for the adults.
Yes.
It's so easy to neglect ourselves when we're focused on supporting a child.
But we can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
Taking care of our own well-being, physically, emotionally, mentally, this is not selfish.
Yeah.
It's essential.
Yeah.
It enables us to show up for the child with the patience and compassion they need.
That's such a powerful reminder. One of the guides for educators talks about creating a grief-aware school environment.
Yes.
I love that concept.
It's a crucial shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that grief doesn't have a timeline
Right.
and creating an environment where children and families feel comfortable expressing their grief without judgment.
So it's not just about getting back to normal,
Right.
but about acknowledging that the child's world has changed
Mm-hmm.
and they need ongoing support.
Precisely, and that support might look different for each child.
Mhm.
One might need extra time for assignments. Another might benefit from a quiet space to decompress. Yet another might need help reconnecting with friends.
This idea of individual needs really resonates with me.
Yes.
One expert highlighted that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to grief.
It's fascinating. It's not just about the individual child's personality. It's their age, their relationship with the person who died, their previous experiences with loss,
Mm-hmm.
their family dynamics.
Yeah.
All these factors influence how they grieve.
And understanding those individual nuances is key to providing truly effective support.
Absolutely. One guide even suggested creating a grief map for the child,
Okay.
a visual representation of their support system,
Oh, wow.
their coping strategies, and their resources.
That's such a practical tool.
Yeah.
It empowers the child to take ownership of their grief journey and identify what they need.
And it encourages open communication within the family. It can be a conversation starter. Let's look at your grief map. What feels helpful today? What are you struggling with?
What stands out to you most from all these resources?
For me, it's the emphasis on validating the child's experience, whatever it looks like. There's no right or wrong way to grieve.
How about for you? What really resonated with you?
One of the things that struck me was this idea that children are permanently changed by significant loss. It's not something they simply get over.
Right.
It becomes part of their story.
That's a powerful thought. It's
Yeah.
not about erasing the pain, but helping them navigate it and build resilience for the future.
Exactly. One guide even mentioned how grief can resurface at different developmental stages. Graduation, marriage, the birth of a child.
Wow.
It's a lifelong journey, really.
And as they grow, their understanding of the loss will deepen, and they'll need to find new ways to make sense of it. One guide used a really powerful image to describe this process.
Yeah.
The analogy of carrying a block of ice.
Oh, yes. In the beginning, grief is all-consuming, heavy, like carrying a giant block of ice.
Yeah.
It weighs you down, makes everything feel difficult.
And you have to kind of adjust to life with this weight.
Right.
Find new ways to do things to cope.
But here's the beautiful part. Each day, a tiny bit of ice melts away.
Ah.
Slowly, gradually, the block becomes lighter. You're still carrying it,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't weigh you down as much.
So it's not about forgetting, but about finding a way to integrate the loss into your life.
I love that integration. It's not about getting over it.
Yeah.
It's about growing around it. It really is a lifelong process. Their understanding evolves as they do, and those waves of grief might resurface at different points in their lives.
It's almost like those milestones, graduations, weddings, even becoming a parent themselves, that it makes them kind of reevaluate that loss from their new perspective.
Exactly. And that's where having healthy coping mechanisms already in place can be so beneficial.
Speaking of which, we talked about creative outlets, but are there any specific activities that you found particularly helpful in these resources?
One that stood out was using art to externalize grief.
Oh,
And it doesn't have to be about, creating a masterpiece,
right.
but more about providing a safe outlet for expression.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a lot less intimidating for a kid who might not feel comfortable talking about their feelings directly.
Exactly. One guide suggests something as simple as providing, different colored paints and asking the child to paint how grief feels.
Oh, wow.
It allows them to explore those emotions without needing words.
And for kids who are more drawn to words, journaling can be a powerful tool.
Absolutely. It can be a private space to process thoughts and feelings without judgment. One tip I found helpful was suggesting prompts like, what's one memory of the person you want to hold on to? Or what's something you wish you could tell them now?
Those are really great prompts. They encourage reflection and remembrance
Yeah.
without forcing the kid to dwell just solely on the sadness.
Another activity that resonated with me was creating a gratitude jar,
Okay.
specifically related to the person they lost.
That's such a lovely idea. It shifts the focus to positive memories
Yeah.
and appreciation.
Exactly. Encourage the child to write down things they were grateful for about that person, things they miss about them, or even funny memories that make them smile.
It's a tangible way to hold on to those positive emotions and kind of counteract that overwhelming sadness that can sometimes take over.
And it can be a wonderful family activity. Everyone can contribute to the jar, sharing their own memories and expressions of gratitude.
You mentioned earlier the importance of understanding the stages of grief, but
Yeah.
how do you even explain that concept to a child who might not even have the vocabulary to articulate those complex emotions?
Well, one guide used the analogy of a weather wheel to explain the different stages of grief.
That's a clever way to kind of visualize it.
Yeah, so each section of the wheel represents a different emotion: sadness, anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance. Just like a weather wheel shows different types of weather.
Okay.
You can explain that just like the weather changes, so do our feelings.
It normalizes those emotional fluctuations, right?
Yeah.
And helps the kid understand that they're not stuck in any one feeling.
Exactly. And you can use the weather wheel as a visual tool to help the child identify what they're feeling at any given moment.
Oh, cool.
Where is your emotional weather today?
And you can even kind of extend that analogy, right?
Yeah?
By explaining that just like we can't control the weather, we can't always control our feelings,
Yeah.
but we can learn to cope with them.
Another analogy that resonated with me was comparing grief to a heavy backpack.
I've heard that one before. It's so relatable, especially for kids.
In the beginning, the backpack is full of heavy rocks, sadness, confusion, anger, and it feels almost impossible to carry.
Yeah.
But over time, as we process our grief, some of those rocks become smaller, lighter pebbles.
The backpack is still there,
Yeah.
but it doesn't weigh us down as much.
It really emphasizes that healing is a gradual process, right?
Yes.
And that it doesn't mean forgetting the person or the pain. It's about learning to carry that weight differently.
And it highlights the importance of finding support.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we wouldn't expect a child to carry a heavy backpack alone.
Yeah.
We shouldn't expect them to navigate grief alone.
That brings us back to the importance of creating a support system.
Yeah.
But how do we go beyond just saying, I'm here for you,
Yeah.
and actually provide tangible support?
Well, one of the experts emphasized the importance of specific offers of help.
Okay.
Instead of just saying, let me know if you need anything,
Right?
which can feel overwhelming to a child who's already struggling,
Yeah.
offer concrete suggestions.
So like, can I bring you dinner tonight? Or would you like to come over and watch a movie?
Exactly. Those specific offers make it easier for the child to accept help and show them that you're truly invested in supporting them. What are some of the red flags that parents or caregivers should be aware of, signs that a child might need more specialized support than we can offer?
Well, one thing to watch out for is prolonged withdrawal or isolation.
Yeah.
If the child is consistently avoiding social interaction or engaging in activities they used to enjoy,
Yeah.
it might be a sign that they're struggling to cope.
And changes in sleep or eating habits, those are also red flags, right?
Absolutely. Persistent insomnia, loss of appetite, or overeating can be indicators of underlying emotional distress.
What about regressive behaviors? Like a child who was previously potty trained starting to have accidents again.
That's another warning sign. Regression to younger behaviors can be a way for children to cope with overwhelming emotions by retreating to a time when they felt safer and more secure.
And what about if the child is expressing thoughts of self-harm or suicide? And those are obviously serious red flags that require immediate professional intervention.
Absolutely. If a child is verbalizing those thoughts, it's crucial to seek help immediately.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to reach out to a mental health professional, a crisis hotline, or even emergency services if necessary.
And it's important to remember that Seeking professional help is not a sign of failure on the part of the parent or caregiver.
No.
Sometimes children need specialized support that we're just not equipped to provide.
Exactly. And seeking help early can make a world of difference in the child's healing journey.
One of the guides talked about the importance of finding a therapist who specializes in grief and loss,
Yes.
especially for children.
hmm
What are some of the key qualities to look for in a therapist?
First and foremost, you want someone who is experienced in working with children and understands the unique ways they process grief,
Okay.
and someone who is compassionate and empathetic, who can create a safe and supportive space for the child to share their feelings.
Absolutely. You also want to look for a therapist who uses evidence-based approaches to grief counseling, like play therapy, art therapy, or cognitive behavioral therapy.
Exactly. And it's important to find someone who's a good fit for the child's personality and needs.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a few tries to find the right therapist.
And it's okay to ask for recommendations
Yeah.
from friends, family members, or your child's doctor.
One thing that stood out to me from the resources was this emphasis on normalizing the grief process.
Hmm.
You know, children often feel very isolated in their grief, like they're the only ones going through it.
Especially if they don't see their peers or adults around them openly expressing their grief.
Exactly. It's important to create opportunities for children to connect with others who have experienced loss.
So support groups can be incredibly beneficial in that regard,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
They provide a safe space for kids to share their stories,
Mm-hmm.
connect with others who understand what they're going through and realize they're not alone.
And those connections can be so powerful in helping children feel less isolated and more supported.
One resource even mentioned the idea of creating a grief library at home or in the classroom.
That's a great idea.
It could include age-appropriate books about grief,
Hmm?
stories about children who have experienced loss, and even memoirs or novels that deal with themes of death and dying.
It normalizes the topic of grief and provides children with different perspectives
Hmm.
on how others have navigated loss.
And it can be a valuable resource for adults too, right?
Yeah.
It can help us learn new ways to talk about grief with kids and expand our understanding of their experiences.
You know, we've talked a lot about the importance of support, but there's also a delicate balance between offering support and giving the child space to grieve in their own way.
That's such an important point. We can't force a child to talk about their grief if they're not ready.
Right.
But we can create the space, the invitation for them to share when they feel comfortable.
Exactly. And sometimes that space is nonverbal.
Hmm.
It might be simply sitting with the child in silence, offering a hug, or engaging in an activity they enjoy.
It's about being present with them in their grief without judgment or expectation.
One of the guides used the analogy of a butterfly emerging from its cocoon to describe the grief process.
That's a beautiful analogy.
The caterpillar undergoes a period of intense transformation within the cocoon.
Right.
Much like a grieving child is going through a period of intense internal change.
Yeah.
And just as we wouldn't try to rush the butterfly's emergence, we shouldn't try to rush a child's grief journey.
We need to be patient, compassionate, and allow them the time and space that they need to heal and emerge as their new selves.
And remember, just as every butterfly is unique, so is every child's grief journey.
Right.
There's no right or wrong way to grieve.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, and it's clear that supporting children through grief requires a multifaceted approach.
It's about creating a foundation of open communication, providing a safe and supportive environment, offering practical help, validating their emotions,
Right.
and respecting their individual needs and coping mechanisms.
And recognizing that grief is a journey, not a destination,
Yes,
and that healing takes time.
absolutely. There will be ups and downs, twists and turns, moments of intense sadness,
Yeah.
and glimmers of joy and hope.
And while we can't shield children from the pain of grief, we can equip them with the tools and support they need to navigate this challenging experience and emerge stronger and more resilient on the other side.
Beautifully said. It's about helping them find meaning in their loss, honor the person they loved,
Yeah.
and integrate that experience into their lives in a way that allows them to heal and thrive.
One of the things that struck me from these resources is the reminder that children are incredibly resilient. They have an innate capacity for healing and growth,
Yeah,
even in the face of profound loss.
that resilience is inspiring, isn't it?
It really is. And it's our role as adults to nurture that resilience, to provide the support and guidance they need to navigate those challenging emotions and emerge from the experience
Mm.
with a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them.
Absolutely. It's about empowering them to find their own path through grief,
Yeah.
honoring their individual needs,
Hmm.
and helping them discover their own unique strengths and coping mechanisms.
One of the things I've been reflecting on throughout this deep dive is how our own experiences with grief shape how
Mm.
we support children.
That's such an insightful observation.
Our own unresolved grief,
Yeah.
our own coping mechanisms, our own comfort levels, talking about death.
Right.
All those things influence how we approach these conversations with children.
And it's a reminder that self-care isn't just about taking care of our physical and emotional needs,
Yeah,
but also about addressing our own grief and seeking support when we need it.
absolutely. We can't be fully present for children if we're carrying the weight of our own unresolved grief.
And it's okay to be vulnerable with children,
Mhm.
to let them see that we're also grieving, that we don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
and that it's okay to feel sad or confused.
That vulnerability can actually be a source of strength, right?
Yeah.
It shows kids that it's okay to express their emotions
Hmm.
and that they're not alone in their grief.
One thing I'm curious about, and perhaps this is something for our listeners to ponder, is how can we as a society become more grief aware?
That's a great question. It starts with normalizing conversations about death and dying,
Yeah.
creating spaces where grief is acknowledged and validated,
Hmm.
and challenging this notion that we need to move on or get over loss.
And recognizing that grief is not a linear process,
Right.
that it can resurface at unexpected times, and there's no set timeline for healing.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of compassion and support,
Mm.
where children and families feel empowered to express their grief in healthy ways and receive the understanding and guidance they need to navigate this challenging experience.
It's a big conversation, and one that I hope we can continue to explore.
Me too. And I hope this deep dive has provided our listeners with a solid foundation for understanding and supporting children through grief.
Me too. Remember, you don't have to do this alone.
Right.
There are resources available, people who care,
Hmm.
and a whole community ready to offer support.
Beautifully said. Keep learning, keep listening, and keep those conversations going.
Yeah.
We talked about creating a supportive environment,
Mm.
providing resources. But what are some practical tips for navigating those everyday moments?
Yeah.
The ones that can be especially challenging for a grieving child.
One thing that often gets overlooked is the importance of maintaining familiar routines.
Okay.
As much as possible,
Mhm.
consistency can really provide a sense of stability and predictability
Right.
during a time when everything else feels chaotic.
So things like bedtime routines, meal times,
Yeah.
even regular play dates with friends, those can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Those routines offer a sense of normalcy and comfort, which can be incredibly grounding
Yeah.
for a child who's feeling lost and disoriented.
And what about those special occasions that can be particularly emotionally charged?
Right.
Like birthdays or holidays.
One guide suggested acknowledging those occasions beforehand
Okay.
and having open conversations with the child about how they want to approach them.
So instead of pretending that the day isn't different,
Yeah.
it's about acknowledging the elephant in the room and giving the child a voice
Mm-hmm.
in how they want to commemorate the occasion.
Exactly. Maybe they want to create a special ritual to remember the person they lost, or maybe they just need some quiet time to reflect.
Yeah.
It's about respecting their individual needs and preferences.
One resource talked about the importance of being mindful of the child's cues, both verbal and nonverbal.
It's about being attuned to their emotional state
Mm-hmm.
and responding with sensitivity.
Yeah.
If they seem withdrawn or overwhelmed, maybe it's not the best time to push a conversation about their feelings.
But it's also important to let them know that we're available when they are ready to talk.
Absolutely. We can create the space for conversation without forcing it.
Right.
Sometimes just being present, offering a hug,
Yeah.
or engaging in a shared activity
Mm-hmm.
can communicate more than words.
One thing I found helpful was the suggestion to validate the child's feelings, even if they seem, irrational or illogical to us.
Children often express grief in ways that we might not understand or even agree with.
like getting angry at the person who died for leaving them,
Yeah.
or blaming themselves for something they couldn't have controlled.
Exactly. It's important to remember that those feelings are a normal part of the grieving process.
Yeah.
Instead of dismissing them or trying to correct the child's thinking,
Right.
we can validate their emotions by simply saying, it's okay to feel that way. It's natural to be angry or confused right now.
And by acknowledging their feelings, we create a safe space
Mm-hmm.
for them to kind of work through those complex emotions.
One expert emphasized the importance of not comparing grief.
Okay.
Each child's experience is unique,
Yeah.
and there's no right or wrong way to grieve.
So even if we've experienced a similar loss,
Right.
it's important not to project our own expectations or timelines onto the child.
Exactly. What helped me cope might not be helpful for them.
Yeah?
It's about meeting them where they are, respecting their individual journey,
Mm-hmm.
and providing support that is tailored to their specific needs.
We've talked a lot about the challenges of supporting children through grief,
Right.
but there's also something incredibly beautiful about witnessing their resilience, their capacity for love and healing.
It is inspiring, isn't it?
It is to see those glimmers of hope and strength emerge,
Yeah.
even amidst the deepest sorrow.
And it reminds us that while grief is profound
Yeah.
and life-altering experience, it doesn't have to define us. We can find ways to honor our loved ones, integrate their memory into our lives,
Yeah.
and continue to grow and evolve.
And as adults, we have this privilege and responsibility to guide children on that journey.
Yes.
To offer them the compassion, understanding, and support.
Yeah.
They need to navigate the complexities of grief
Mm-hmm.
and emerge stronger and more resilient on the other side.
If there's one message I want our listeners to take away from this deep dive, it's that you don't have to do this alone.
Right.
There are resources available, people who care,
Mm.
and a whole community ready to support you and your child through this challenging time.
Beautifully said. Reach out, connect, ask for help. And remember that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, there is always healing, and there is always love.